Okay, good evening everyone. I am going to have some problems this evening. It's raining very hard outside and there is a lot of noise. It's also lightning and thundering, and I'm not sure at all that I'm going to be heard. So what I'd like to do is, if there's anybody who is with me, who is listening, who is watching, I would like you to give me some feedback and tell me what it sounds like. Because if the rain doesn't stop shortly, or if you can't hear me properly, then I'm going to have to postpone this until some other time. The other thing is that many times when we have lightning and rain falling like this, I lose the internet, and if that happens, I'm not going to be able to continue, of course. So, okay, I see Larius, you are there. Are you hearing me all right? Or how is the rain? Is the background noise really affecting anything? Give me some feedback. Okay, I see you guys. I see Claudia, Brian. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for the feedback. I appreciate it. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead then. What I wanted to do this evening is talk a little bit about something that has been a little bit on my mind because of what is presently happening. I was watching somebody sent me a link to this video by Andrew Henriquez where he's talking about what has happened in the Adventist Church recently, where this minister up in California preached a sermon where he's encouraging the people to abandon what he calls the ancient texts, and they are to their relationship to God is supposed to be based on a different principle than the ancient text. What he's talking about, of course, is the Bible, in particular the Old Testament, but also it appears he wants to throw away some parts of the New Testament as well. The main point is that he is supportive of the gay movement, the LGBT movement, and he wants the church to come to the place where they don't use the Bible as the basis for how they relate to the LGBT movement. It's interesting to me that in looking at this subject, Andrew Henriquez, he keeps emphasizing that there are two things that came out of Eden, and that Satan is attacking the both of them. He talks about marriage and he talks about the Sabbath. Most of you know that that for the past few years I have been trying to show that there's a connection between the gay movement and the mark of the beast issue. To be honest, it's something that I've not been forceful with it, because I've always been saying, well, I can be wrong, and I'm aware that when I try to present this point of view, I have a lot going against me. Most of the people who watch this channel, who receive the materials that we sent out, are people who come from the background of Seventh-day Adventism. And of course, where Seventh-day Adventism is concerned, what Ellen White says is usually the final word. If Ellen White says something, then nobody argues. That's the end of the discussion. And so because of this, I admit that I have been a little cautious in how I try to push the idea that there's a strong relationship between the mark of the beast and the gay movement. But more and more, it's becoming clearer and clearer to me, and I believe to many other people, that this gay movement it has a significant role to play in the last great crisis, and I still believe that it is more heavily involved with the mark of the beast than many people recognize. But I think we're coming to the place. I think the things which are happening now are beginning to open the eyes of people so that they can no longer avoid the reality that this homosexual movement, this gay movement, definitely has some part to play in the mark of the beast. So this afternoon, what I want to do is just quickly revise a couple of things that I've shared before, but I want to maybe, since this is a shorter presentation, I want to just look at a few things very quickly and see if we can just focus on some of the key points. Now, the first thing I want to mention is that the Bible, it seems to me the Bible very clearly teaches that when men begin to reject God, when men begin to turn away from God, when God has revealed himself to people and they choose to defy God and they choose to turn away from God, I think the Bible very clearly shows or states that one of the major things that happens is that those people begin to practice homosexuality. When you go to Romans chapter 1, it's very plain, and maybe I should just look at the passage here. Romans chapter 1, Paul talks about this, and I know we're all familiar with the passage, but I just want to look at it quickly. Down to about verse 18 or thereabouts. He says, let me go down to verse 21. Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. And I just want to pause here, because this is strikingly evident in what is presently going on in the world. I mean, these people who are supposed to be educated, who are supposed to be highly learned, are some of the biggest idiots on the planet. You know, I just read an article, when was it? This morning, where a transgender man, well, I don't know if it's a man or a woman. He was a man, and he was a weightlifter in a competitive weightlifter. Decided that he wanted to become a woman, changed and became a woman, supposedly, and is still competitively lifting weights, but now as a woman. He of course beat all the women, came out as champion, you know, in this competition in Australia. She is from New Zealand, and it's perfectly acceptable. The other competitors of course are upset about it, but the authorities, the powers that be, the supposedly wise people who are really stupid, accept it, because they say he is now a she. Now, any stupid person knows that such a thing does not make sense, except these supposedly wise people. You know, they are the ones who want to make it lawful for men to use female bathrooms because they feel like they are women. The biblical statement that they profess themselves to be wise, but they have become fools, is strikingly brought out in what is happening in the world today in this gay movement. Now, Paul goes on to say, they changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like unto corruptible man, unto birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. In other words, they brought God down to their own level. They began to treat God as though he was a man like themselves, like he was a created thing. And it says, wherefore God gave them up to uncleanness through the desires of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. So it says God gave them up. What is happening, what we see happening in the world today, in the sexual perversions that are taking place, is God abandoning humanity. The Spirit of God is being withdrawn from the world, And this is what is happening. It says, they changed the truth of God into a lie and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. This is a clear reference to evolution, where these people believe that everything came about through forces of nature and not by any God. And so it says that Paul says, for this cause, because of this, because of their attitude to God, or because of their atheism, because of their rejection of God, because they refuse to acknowledge God, God gave them up unto vile affections. For even the woman did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error, which was meet or which was fitting. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient or which are not fitting. I mean, this is one of the most striking passages in the Bible, because it so clearly describes what is happening in the world today. So these people, what is happening in the world is a direct result of rejecting God, is a direct result of the evolutionary theory taking over on this planet. So what is interesting is that when we look at the beast in Revelation, particularly in Revelation chapter 17, what we see is that the beast is not a religious power. That is the other thing that is very striking. It's not a religious power. Most of the people that I associate with believe that this beast is a religious power. As a matter of fact, they believe that it represents the papacy. And I acknowledge that there are some lines of evidence that would support the idea that this beast is a papacy. But when you look at all the evidence, a reasonable person has to come to a different conclusion. Because in Revelation 17, the woman is riding the beast, and it is believed that this woman represents, at least for the most part, it represents a Roman Catholic institution. So if the woman is the Catholic institution and she's riding the beast, then who is the beast? Well, some say that the beast is a political part of the Roman Catholic system. So you have the church itself, which is the woman, and you have the Vatican, which is the political side of it. So this beast would represent the Vatican, so they say. But interestingly, later on in that same chapter, in Revelation chapter 17, you find where the 10 horns on the head of the beast turn against the woman. They eat her flesh, make her naked, and burn her with fire. Now the horns are not disassociated from the beast. They are a part of the beast. Everything that God tells us is intended to give us information, to help us to come to our conclusions. So the horns are sitting on the beast. They are a part of the beast system. So it is actually the beast through the horns who turns against the woman and eats her flesh, make her naked, and burn her with fire. Now how then can the beast be the Vatican? How can it be the political part of the Roman Catholic system when it turns around and through the 10 horns it attacks and devastates the woman? That does not make sense. The woman is destroyed before the return of Christ. If you look at Revelation 18, you find where she is destroyed. You find where it says Babylon is fallen, that great city. You find that the kings of the earth, they are throwing dust in the air. They are weeping and wailing and saying, in 1 hour is such great riches come to naught. So the woman is gone, or at least she is broken down to nothing. But the beast remains fit and healthy. Because when Jesus returns, let's look at the Bible again in Revelation chapter 19 and the last 3 verses. Here is what we read. This is the coming of Jesus. I mean, if we look a little further up, we see where it says, verse 11, and I saw heaven opened, and behold a white horse, and he that sat upon him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he doth judge and make war. It goes on to say, and the armies which were in heaven followed him upon white robes, clothed in fine linen, white and clean. And out of his mouth goeth a sharp sword, that with it he should smite the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron, and he treadeth the winepress of the fierceness and wrath of Almighty God. And he had on his vesture and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Now it's in this context that you go down and you see where it says, and I saw the beast and the kings of the earth, and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the horse and against his army. So the beast is alive and well, and the kings of the earth are with him. And I believe that these kings of the earth represent the 10 horns that are on the head of the beast, especially them. They are gathered together to make war against the one sitting on the horse. And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him. Now, just pause for a moment on this. Who is this false prophet, and when did he work miracles before the beast or in the presence of the beast? We have to go back to Revelation 13, and it tells us that a beast came up out of the earth that had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. This beast performed miracles and told people that they should worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. So this beast here and this false prophet are the same 2 entities that are seen in Revelation 13, the beast and the false prophet. That is the 2 beasts that were in Revelation 13, the 10-horned beast and the beast with 2 horns. Now both of them are here alive and well. What has happened to the Catholic Church at this time? It has already been taken out of the way from chapter 18. It no longer is in the picture here at this point. So the Catholic Church cannot be the beast. That's the point I'm making. It says, with this false prophet and the beast had wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast, and them that worshipped his image. These both were cast alive into a lake of fire, burning with brimstone. So the point I'm really making is that this beast cannot be a religious power. Why? Because it makes war against the false religious power. It makes war against the Catholic Church. And I think it's not just the Catholic Church, it's the other churches, the other religious groups that are associated with her that make up this great Babylon. So the beast wipes out false religion, or at least it devastates it, brings it down to nothing, and then it turns around, it fights against Christ. So it is an enemy of true religion, and it's an enemy of false religion. That is what makes me believe that this beast is not a religious power. It's a godless power. It represents a kingdom that denies the existence of God, that rejects the authority of God, and that dominates the world in the last moments of time. So this is perfectly in harmony with what Paul says in Romans 1. Paul says that when people reject God, when they have the evidence for God and they turn their backs on this and they reject God, God leaves them alone. What we are looking at is evolutionary atheism. We are looking at a system that arises on the earth that is focused on human wisdom, human education, human philosophies, a human way of thinking, and that rejects the authority of God. And this system introduces wholesale, universally, sodomite behavior. Now, when I look at the Bible, It's strikingly clear to me. And the things that are happening in the world today testify that there is a lot of merit in what I'm saying. Because, interestingly, we've always believed that whatever the mark of the beast is, it is going to invade the Christian churches. And it's interesting to me that, when you think about it, most of us as Adventists, believe that the mark of the beast is going to be a command to force people to worship on Sunday. But when you think about it, if we have to worship on Sunday, there's nothing really wrong with worshiping on Sunday, because many of us already, sometimes we have a day of fasting, we have it on a Sunday. Because in actual fact, we should worship every day of the week. So if somebody tells me to worship on Sunday, I don't have a problem. I'll worship on Sunday. It's another day that I have for giving thanks and praise to God. What would be a problem is if they tell me I can't worship on the Sabbath. That would be a problem. So Sunday worship in itself is not a problem. What would be a problem is a command to not worship on Sabbath. And really, it's very difficult for me to conceive of such a thing ever happening. Very difficult. And furthermore, there is nowhere in the Bible that I can find where such a thing is ever suggested. But I understand Adventists have a certain background, and you can't get away from that background. It's a matter of let us wait and see. But when I look at this gay agenda, what is happening with this homosexual issue, and when I understand the identity of the beast, the question is, if we have been wrong about the identity of the beast, and I'm pretty sure about that, then it seems obvious that we are probably wrong about the identity of the mark of the beast, because the mark, we have said, belongs to the Roman Catholic Church. First of all, we identify the beast as a Roman Catholic institution. Then we try to identify what is the mark of Catholicism, and we say it is Sunday observance. So we tie the identity of the beast to the mark. But if the beast is not the Roman Catholic institution, then clearly the mark is wrong. What we are looking for is a mark that we associate with rejecting God and with turning to godlessness. And Paul says that this mark that follows the rejection of God, is a practice of sodomite behavior. I can't really escape it if I take the Bible as my authority. And what it means, my brothers and sisters, my friends, what it means is that we are living in a tremendous period of history. What is happening on the earth right now is frightening. It's something that ought to awaken those of us who call ourselves God's people, who are concerned about the honor and glory of God. Because in many Christian churches, sodomy has already been accepted. And right now, what we see happening is that in many Adventist churches, first of all in the state of California, which we know is a very liberal place, but also in the Netherlands Conference, the Netherlands Conference has been instructed, the leadership has instructed the churches to accept all LGBT people. In California now, where they already introduced women's ordination, they are now, not just California, what happened recently with this pastor happened in Washington State. What they are doing is they are pushing for homosexuals to be accepted as members in good and regular standing in the Adventist Church. The Chico Church in California already baptized 2 women who are married to each other, accepted them as members. There's already a transgender woman, I think it is, a man changed to a woman, who is an elder in a church in California. And now we have this sermon that took place in Washington, where this minister is urging the people to reject the ancient words, he calls it. In other words, the words of the Bible. His philosophy, his theory is that many of the words in the Bible are not to be taken literally. They were not intended to be a means of governing God's people now that we have come to know Christ and know Christ's ways. And to some degree, what he's saying is true to some degree. In other words, you'll find where Jesus said, "You have heard that it has been said, thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy." Those words, Jesus was quoting from what the Jews believed. And there are many things that are said there. You know, if you find a dead animal, you can sell it to a stranger, but not to your own people. Though it's very clear that we need to understand what was happening, and we need to adjust those words to what is taught to us in the New Testament. But this man is going further, because he wants us also to reject those verses we just read from the book of Romans, what the Apostle Paul says. And this is clearly New Testament teaching. Because what we do, we need to understand the principle behind what was said in Old Testament times. When God said, "Thou shalt not commit adultery," this was in the Old Testament. Were the principles behind that law good or evil? It was good. So do we reject, do we throw that out now? Did God really mean that adultery was wrong then? And when he said that if a man lies with another man, he's to be put to death. We don't put people to death now. But are the principles behind that rule? Does God still believe that homosexuality and bestiality and a man having sex with his sister or his mother or his daughter, are these things still evil? Should we throw out these verses as well? No. We understand that the principle that God laid down there are absolute truths. So it's abominable that so-called Christians today should be seeking to bring this abomination into the church. And the thing is, I believe that they are going to succeed. I believe they are going to succeed. I don't see, and you can reason with me for a little bit. Just reason with me. People talk about churches being 501c3. I think that's a term they use in America, which means that they exist and they function at the pleasure of the government. 501c3, I think, means that they are tax exempt. They are recognized by the government as being a charitable institution, so they don't have to pay taxes. But even beyond that, they exist as denominations, and they function within the society because the government gives them that right. Now, the Adventist Church, like all denominations, is an institution that runs like a business. It's an organization, and it functions with all the parameters of an organization. If this organization ever breaks apart, it ceases to function. What happens is that you have independent people who might believe the same thing, but they no longer are under a hierarchical system. The hierarchy is the key element in the Adventist denomination and in almost every denomination. There are hierarchies who are controlled from a central governing body, and that is what holds them together. Now, the developed countries in the world, countries like America, like the countries of Europe, like the countries down under Australia, New Zealand, they are pushing for gay rights to be declared to be human rights. And we understand what human rights are. They are considered to be unchangeable, inalienable rights that all people have. Now, if and when, and I believe it will happen, because these are the countries that have the money. The Canadian ambassador, somebody from Canada, was here recently, and he was pushing for Jamaica. He was pushing the government, pushing the people to legalize the practice of sodomy, because it's illegal in Jamaica. But you see, countries like Jamaica really don't have much of a choice, because we depend heavily on these developed countries for aid, for trade. They have their ways of squeezing us. And more there is a growing ripple, an undercurrent in Jamaica, where the so-called educated people, where the university trained people are beginning to ridicule our position on homosexuality, and they are pushing for these to change. And it's just a matter of time, not only in Jamaica but in every country. Now, when this happens, when this thing becomes a matter of human rights, and maybe it doesn't even get there, but in the developed countries, what are the churches going to do? When the government begins to require you to treat gay people the same way as heterosexuals are treated, in terms of giving them jobs, in terms of allowing them to function in the church, in terms of allowing them to work in church institutions, in terms of no kind of discrimination whatsoever. Now, the word discrimination is a bad word, but I'll tell you, I believe in discrimination as a Christian. I believe that if a man is a homosexual, he's not supposed to teach my children. I discriminate in that way. I don't believe a pedophile should be allowed to teach my children. I don't believe, so you have discrimination. You have discrimination on the basis that a certain kind of person is a bad influence, cannot function in this place. If somebody doesn't bathe, I don't want him working in my business. If he refuses to have a bath. So what I'm saying is that discrimination is not necessarily wrong in all cases. Homosexual practice is something that people can choose to do or not to do. So, but if the world makes it a human right, denominations that function at the pleasure of the government, denominations that are registered with the government and that operate within the society on the basis of a structured organization, must make a decision either to continue to function that way or to break up. Now, it doesn't need too much of an imagination to think where these churches are going to go when that happens. Some people may not recognize it, but having been a part of the Adventist Church for many years, even though I've been out of it for nearly 30 years now, more than 30, but what I recognize is that the name of the game for these institutions is survival. They have to survive at any cost. They don't mind changing a few doctrines. They don't mind kicking out a few people, as long as the church survives. The church is what people come to respect, worship, revere, and it has to survive. So, I already know what is going to happen. And I don't need to be a prophet. And those who don't believe what I'm saying, they will find out soon enough. You know, when we look at what happened in the time of the destruction of Jerusalem, there is a video on this channel entitled "The Abomination of Desolation," and I would encourage everyone to look at it. But briefly, what I try to point out in that video is that at the time of the destruction of Jerusalem, there were three powers. There were three powers that were involved in that drama. One of them was the Romans. The other one was the Jews. And the third one was the Christian church. Now, look at the situation, because it was at this time that the abomination of desolation stood in the holy place. If you look at Jesus' statements about the abomination of desolation, he said to his disciples, when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it ought not, in the holy place, then those that were in Jerusalem should flee to the mountains. Now, as we read the Bible, in the book of Daniel chapter 12 and other places, we see clearly that this abomination of desolation is to have another application at the end of time. So to understand what the end time abomination of desolation will be and how it will play out, let's look at what happened in the time of Jesus. What you had was two religious groups dwelling in close association. You had the Jews, and the Jews were the professing people of God. They professed to be God's people. They had once been God's people. They had the organized system. But were they God's people? No. The Spirit of God had departed from them at that time for about 40 years. But they still had the name. They still had many of the practices. They still believed that they were God's special chosen people, and they behaved accordingly. You had among them the true church of God. Now this was a badly organized by human standards. It was a barely organized system. It had only very minimal organization. It was controlled by the Spirit of God. It was poor, and it was persecuted by the Jewish church. The church that claimed to be God's people persecuted this small group of people. And in fact, if you want to give an equivalent name to the Jewish church at that time, it was Babylon. It was the Babylon of that day. Because when you look at Revelation, it says that, when you look at Babylon in Revelation 17, it says that in her was the blood of all that were slain upon the earth. And if you notice, Jesus said the same exact thing about the Jewish church. I think it's in Matthew 23. He says that upon the Jews would come the blood of all that was slain upon the earth. So I'm saying that the Jewish nation at that time represented the Babylon of that day. And the apostolic church represented the true Christian body. Now the Jews persecuted the Christians mercilessly. But at the time of the end, the time when everything was going to be wrapped up, another power entered the picture. And it was a secular power. It was not a religious power. I mean, the Romans had their own religion, but they did not come in the name of religion by any means. They came as a secular power. They regarded the Jews as their enemies, and they regarded the Christians as their enemies. So they came to destroy both of them, just like the beast will do at the end of time. Now, what happened was that they came and they planted their banners in the ground outside Jerusalem. The abomination of desolation came and stood where it was not supposed to stand. And when it happened, when these banners were planted in the holy ground, so-called holy ground around Jerusalem, it was time for the Christians to get out. And that's what they did. As soon as the Roman armies withdrew, they got out of Jerusalem and they escaped. The Jews and the foolish people who were tied to the church, the so-called church, they stayed there and they lost their lives. Now, to apply that to today, what we see happening is that the powers of Rome, the secular powers of Rome, when I say Rome, I don't mean religious Rome, I mean political Rome. The powers of Europe and America, both of them coming from the same roots originally, these are the two great powers on earth that are pushing certain things on the world, in particular the gay agenda. They are coming, they are closing in on the religious groups in the world, the Christianized groups especially. What we see happening is that secularism and atheism are gradually crushing the life out of Christianity. But there are two different basic groups in Christendom. There is the organized religious bodies that kowtow to the powers. They bend and they bend over backwards and they submit to the authorities. And you have the disorganized, what some people would call crazy, offshoot set of people who are trying their best to be faithful to the Lord and to live by His direction alone. Now, if you look at the antitype, when the banners of Rome are planted in the apostate church, because that's what happened. The Roman armies came and they planted their flags in the grounds of the apostate system, in the holy ground. When the mark of Rome is planted in the so-called Christian church, everybody who is a part of those systems is to get out. This is the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place. So what it means literally is that when the gay movement, when the mark of this atheistic, of these ungodly secular powers is planted in the Christian church or in the Babylon of today, when homosexuality begins to be accepted in the churches, then in every church where this happens, the people are to get out. It's their last opportunity to flee. If they remain there, the consequence is they are going to be destroyed with Babylon. And that is what we see in Revelation 18. It says, Babylon is fallen. Come out of her, my people, lest you be made partakers of her sins and you receive of her plagues. God has given us a mark, an indicator, when it's the last moment to get out of these systems. And I believe we are seeing today the fulfillment of that prophecy. The mark of the beast, the mark of this godless secular system has now come into the Christian churches. One by one it is coming. It's in the Anglican church, it's in the Lutheran church, it's in the Disciples of Christ, it's in several other Christian groups. It is now pushing its way determinedly into the Seventh-day Adventist church. I pray that God's people might have their eyes open. So what I'm saying is, we are living in a tremendous time. I'm not by any means trying to give a comprehensive study on the subject this evening. I just want to stir us up a little bit with regards to this issue, because so much is happening, it's hard to not talk about it. I could mention that when you go to Revelation chapter 14 and you look at the third angel's message, you can't escape the fact that this message is pointing you back to what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. Why? Why does God point us back to Sodom and Gomorrah when he talks about the mark of the beast? More and more, the conviction comes upon me that what I'm saying with regards to this is true, more and more. And the hardest thing is that I'm dealing with Seventh-day Adventists. And in Seventh-day Adventism, this is a mountain to climb. The best thing I can say about it is that, the Jews had their prophets too. And they had everything worked out. They knew everything because they had their prophets. But at the end, God surprised them. And I have a strong belief that the same thing is going to happen again in this end of time. Anyway, thanks for listening. I'm going to stop at this point. And, I appreciate those of you who have joined me. I'm going to just take any questions that you might have, or any thoughts that you might have expressed while I was talking. Thank you for your comments, Brian, Laios, Claudia. Nice to have you with us this evening. I hope you can be with us more often. And of course, what you are saying is so true. The professors who profess to be wise but are fools, they have deceived almost the whole world into thinking that being gay is something you're born with. Even though all their scientific studies cannot find a single proof, a single element in the human DNA or makeup that suggests it is so. The truth is that there are many cases where there are twins, twins who have come from the same fertilized egg, and yet one may be homosexual and the other is not. So it's clear that it's not something genetic. Another striking thing is that if you notice how rapidly it has spread, you will recognize that what is happening is that evil is influencing people. the prevalence of evil is influencing people to get into this practice. You know, just to give you a little commentary on how the opening of doors creates abominable things. When I was a boy, the idea of oral sex was taboo in Jamaica. They had a derogatory word for people who practiced that kind of thing. And you know, it was always thought to be a perversion of Americans and people like that, but not in Jamaica. It was never practiced here. This is many years later, but today, you know, if you read articles in the newspaper, if you listen to people talk, it has become absolutely normal. And how did it happen? It happened because we began to be bombarded with American movies, American television, and then pornographic videos became widely available, not only through outlets here, but also through the internet. So everybody watches the internet, and so people's minds began to change. Now the same thing is happening with homosexuality. This filthy practice is being regarded as normal because everybody else is doing it, and so more and more people are getting into it. So that one of the most sickening things is that men are even practicing it with their wives. I mean, what a world! But this is why God said in the Bible, this is why God said under the days of the law, God said if a man was caught who did it, he was to be put to death immediately. God understands human psychology, and he understands that if you open the door to certain things, it's going to spread, because that is the way sin operates. So there are certain kinds of sin that God says once it appears, even one time, kill it instantly. Don't give it a chance to get a foothold. One of these was bestiality, homosexuality, adultery, having sex with one's own close relative. These things, people were to be killed for it, because God wanted everybody to know these things are not to be tolerated in the slightest degree. This just tells us how potentially harmful they were. So today, what is happening in the world now is that the spread of evil, the unrestrained spread of evil, is infecting everyone. And that is why it is not because people are genetically disposed. It is because human nature without God is nasty. Human nature without God, it craves perversions. And once you push God out of the picture, nothing else is left. And that is why, you know, you see man going from one strange behavior to another. It's because it's the way of humanity when God is taken out of the picture. Darrell, okay, you ask a question here that is a bit unrelated, but I'll see if I can give an answer. Can you briefly comment on the verse that addresses Jesus as my Lord and my God? Okay, the first thing I would say is that this addresses the idea that not everything that is in the Bible is an inspired statement. It's a true record of what happened, but it's not necessarily an inspired statement. Now remember who made this statement. It was Thomas, right? Now, why did Thomas make this statement? Remember that the week before, Jesus appeared to the other disciples, and Thomas was not there. And when they told him about it, Thomas says, unless I can push my hand in his side and I see the scars in his hand, I won't believe that it is he. So Thomas already says, I don't believe that Jesus was raised from the dead. Thomas is called Doubting Thomas for a reason. He always was a bit of a skeptic. So now he says, I don't believe. So the next week, Jesus comes and he appears again. And he says, Thomas, push your hand in my side and see the scars in my hand and see that it is I. Thomas says, my Lord and my God. Now let me ask the question. What did Thomas see to make him conclude that Jesus is my God? I mean, he saw that Jesus was raised from the dead. Does that say that Jesus is God? Was Thomas at this time qualified to be a theologian, to give the truth about Jesus' true identity? Was he yet filled with the Holy Spirit? No, he was a man who was suffering under unbelief. He was a skeptic and a doubter. Apparently, to see Jesus in person appear before him, he was kind of like thrown off balance. In Jamaica, we would say, he turned a fool, in turned fool, meaning that his mind was confused. It's like when Peter saw Moses and Elijah on the mountain with Jesus, he said, let us make 3 tabernacles. One for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. Now, was this an inspired statement? No, what he was doing, he was putting Moses and Elijah on an equality with Jesus. And God had to tell him, this is my beloved son, hear him. Now, Thomas basically does the same thing. He does not know who Jesus is, but, I mean, he has no inspired, no divine revelation. But he is so overwhelmed by the fact that Jesus has risen from the dead. He labels him as God, my Lord and my God. And so I believe that the best he could have meant was that Jesus was a divine person. You know, let's be generous and say that he knew what he was saying. But what he was saying was that Jesus is a divine person. Like John says in the beginning was the word was with God, and the word was God. He means the word was a divine person. So possibly that's what he could have meant. But the point I'm making is that there's nothing that tells us that Thomas was qualified at this moment to declare who Jesus really was. So I would not use that statement as being very authoritative at all. Thomas was a man who was at that moment very skeptical and very doubtful. So that's just my thought on it. All right. Well, I think that basically brings us to an end this evening. So I want to say thank you all very much for being with me. I appreciate your company. And all right, Florian. Yeah, we can ask Thomas in person what he really meant. But in the meantime, I don't think it would be wise to use that as a definitive statement. You know, there's a man who said, all right, there's a man that was born blind, and Jesus gave him sight. And then when the Jews began to interrogate the man, he said, now if any man is a sinner and doeth not the will of God, we know that God does not hear sinners. Now many people have used this as a biblical teaching. But again, you have to think about who said it. This man was born blind, and all his life he had been led to believe, he had been taught by the Jews that God does not hear sinners. This had been thrown at him, it had been bred into him, so that he believed that the fact that he was blind was because he was born a sinner. He was born that way. And his parents, so you know, the disciples asked when they saw him, who did sin? This man or his parents that he was born blind? It was a popular belief. So when the man says we know that God does not hear sinners, he was simply expressing a popular belief. It's not a theologically correct statement, because if God does not hear sinners, then none of us could obtain mercy. Plus we know that God does not bless us because we are righteous, but he blesses us because we have faith. So many people who are not even Christians, who exercise genuine faith, have received a blessing from God. So God does hear sinners. Although it is true that when you are a messenger of God, if you indulge sin in your life, then you close up the avenue for God to work. But you know, it's a statement that is not an absolute truth, in other words. Alright, well, God bless you all and have a good evening. I'm going to just have a word of prayer at the end, because we didn't publicly pray at the beginning, but I'd like to close with prayer. So let's just bow our heads. Our Father, thank you for being with us, and thank you for directing our thoughts this evening. Thank you for the fellowship we have enjoyed. For those who have joined me from different places in the world, I thank you, Father. Grant that the things that we have discussed this evening might take their proper importance in our minds and in our lives, that we might stand where you want us to stand, now and in the coming crisis. Thank you, Father. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, God bless you. All right, Lagos, thank you. Yes, and the connection, yeah, praise the Lord. All right, bye.